Welcome to the Pathways to Healing Facebook Live as we talk about the anxiety of the re-entry process into the new normal. I put that in quotes for a reason. And I'm Kristen Boice, and I'm welcomed by Rachel Hall. She is a licensed mental health counselor with Pathways. Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
And Roxie Stone, who's a licensed clinical social worker. Hi, Roxie.
Hi, Kristen. Hi, Rachel.
I'm so happy you're here this evening to join me in this very important conversation. And the Pathways to Healing Counseling team, one of the best teams, I have to say, out there, is doing an incredible job working with clients as part of the re-entry process with COVID-19 and the pandemic. And I was looking up a statistic just to find out how many people are facing this anxiety. And we all have anxiety on some level or another on a continuum. And you might feel like, oh, I don't feel that anxious. You might be on the lower end or the higher end, depending on what you're doing. And anxiety just doesn't face the re-entry process. We might feel anxious in other areas. So according to the American Psychological Association, 50% of the American public is experiencing anxiety. We're calling it the re-entry anxiety process. So you're not alone. So you're going to want to hang on tonight as we talk about how to cope with the re-entry process and transitions. We welcome your questions. So please feel free to share what you're feeling, what you're going through, and any questions you may have throughout this live. We are here for you. We want to help you really deal and face with all that fear that you might be experiencing as things are opening back up. So I'm going to start it off with Rachel Hall. And Rachel, what are you seeing in terms of your clients and the anxiety that they're experiencing about this transition?
Yeah, I think it's been a little bit surprising because everyone has such a different response, right? I work with a lot of first responders. First responders didn't get to lockdown, didn't get the opportunity to kind of shelter in place or whatever we want to call it. And so they've been going per normal for about, the 14 months that we've been in the COVID pandemic. So there's very little anxiety there for populations. You think about grocery workers who have had to go to work the whole time, healthcare workers, teachers. There's a big section of the population that didn't sort of get much break from the norm. They just got hypervigilant pandemic mode. And then you've got, the rest of the population that has been working from home. I have a lot of clients who work for companies in the area who have been, at home kind of from the very beginning of the pandemic and are just now starting to hear whether or not they'll go back to work. So we run the gamut, and everybody just kind of is feeling their own emotions and experiencing re-entry from their own personal perspective. I think the hard thing for me to understand is why there's so much judgment about why one person may feel differently about re-entry than I do. And I think the criticism, the judgment, the critique, the media plays a role in that. Politics plays a role in that. I think that has really intensified what re-entry even looks like. There are people who are pro-mask, anti-mask, wear a mask, who cares? I mean, it's just one of those things where we are not all going to agree, but we personalize everybody else's perspective. And I think that has just added a level of anxiety and intensity to this re-entry process that probably, I personally, I know it doesn't need to be there, but I know there's a lot of layers that create that stress. And so I just think people are not only scared health-wise sometimes of, is the COVID virus still out there? Is it still out to get me? Is it going to hurt my kids? Is it going to hurt me? You've got that. And then you've got, there's no such thing as a COVID virus. And nobody, like even just within family units, people feel differently about everything. And I know I had a client last week and I just thought it was so powerful. The comment was, we see it differently in my house than my family members see it. And I'm scared that us functioning one way is going to keep me from engagement with them. So I'm not so sure that reentry is just all about health crisis or health scare. I think the anxiety is coming from, who am I going to make angry? Who's going to like me? Who's not going to like me? How am I going to handle this? I just think there's so many powerful layers and people are just overwhelmed in sort of a perpetual state of overwhelm. And just quickly, we started with a level of overwhelm at the beginning of the pandemic. Well, now we've got to shut down. And what does this look like? And again, this virus is out to get us. And so that was one level of overwhelm that we kind of acclimated to over 14 or 15 months. And now we're facing a new level of overwhelm, a different topic that is overwhelming. So we've just been sort of in a chronic perpetual state of trauma for about 14 or 15 months. And we're all sort of exhausted from it.
Yes, and I think the survival state that we've wanted to stay safe, or maybe we've lost someone during this COVID pandemic, and the grief of that, the grief of not seeing loved ones and family members, there's been a lot of loss, I think, underneath it as well, that has perpetuated this fear of losing again, like going through that again somehow. So that survival state really has taken a toll, I think, on so many people. So I think
it really has.
Yeah.
And my very wise husband brought this to my attention about 2 weeks ago. I said, I'm so tired. And he said, I just feel like the whole, all of society is kind of coming out from having to be on our guard. And we're just now starting to realize how exhausted we are. He's so wise, that guy. He may watch this later, so I'm going to get points. But it kind of hit me. And I'm like, we are absolutely our nervous systems are coming out of that hypervigilant mode. And we have adrenal fatigue and we are just worn out. And that feeling is completely understandable.
Yes. And I do think the judgment that has ensued just by all of the events of 2020 and 2021 have really put this sense of trying to self-protect, wanting to be seen and heard, wanting to be acknowledged at a new heightened level. And now what we're working on is cutting the cord on kind of needing that from anybody. And you're going to acknowledge that for yourself. You're not going to be tethered to someone else doing that for you, although that feels really nice and that feels like a warm hug, even though we haven't been able to hug for so long. You acknowledging your feelings is so important during this process. Roxie, what have you seen from your clients, and what are your thoughts on this?
Oh my goodness. It encompasses so much. I see so much polarization, not only in clients, but among friends, among my family who take vastly different positions. And it's just really hard all the way around. And I really wanted to respond to what you were saying about being tired, Rachel. I was listening to, I think it was a neuropsychologist who talked about how we have had to do so much transition, so much shifting in our life, from quarantine to pandemic to, can I go to the grocery store? Is it safe to bring in my mail? Do I have to wipe off all the groceries that I buy? How do I manage this? How do I wash my hands all the time? And where do I find more cream? And I'm running out of toilet paper and just all of these things. And he said that we had to make new neural pathways to adjust to all of the changes that we made. Plus, we weren't really given clear instructions. And so much of the information that we get differs. And that also helps to make us tired. And now we're going to go through it again, because I have a hard time believing that we're going back to the same exact situation that we were in before. And I know I have clients who are concerned, some clients who are afraid of getting COVID, and loved ones who say, I had COVID, it wasn't all that bad, so it doesn't really bother me. And it's hard to, I think, for all of us to adjust to all of those differing kinds of things. And yet, people have the right and the responsibility to make decisions for themselves and for their families that don't necessarily agree with me, or maybe with you or you.
Well, and that's a whole other layer. And like Joni said in the comments, vaccinations, add that in as a point of contention amongst all of us. And it's interesting because, as you were saying, Roxie, I feel like another traumatizing factor in all of this is that you can't trust information, right? Because you get 14 different perspectives. You get, 8 different people saying, I'm the expert and it's this, and I'm the expert and it's the exact opposite thing. And then somewhere in between, and it's kind of like, man, now I don't even know who to trust. Right. And that's a whole additional fear that you kind of add into the mix.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even the COVID disease itself with the symptoms were so unclear and uncertain, and who and how and who knows. Really and true. It's been very confusing for us all.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
It's a very interesting time to take in information as information is disseminated. And like you were saying, Roxie, what do I believe? And Rachel, what is right? What do I do with this? Who do I believe? Who do I trust? And I think that creates even more of that uncertainty and that anxiety. We already have uncertainty with the virus, and our brains love certainty. That's why we write stories, is because our brains like to have a certain outcome. We all like that. We're like, can you just tell me the outcome? Can you just tell me how this is going to go? And then we feel like we can take a breath and have a felt sense of safety, when the truth is we're in uncertainty all the time. How do we nurture that fear and lean into the discomfort of making a transition? Feel free to jump in, whoever wants to speak to that.
Well, I can start. I'm sure Roxie will have other things to add. I think, and this is going to be risky. It's going to be risky to say this, but when we're talking about people critiquing and judging someone else's beliefs, opinions, actions, that's a defense mechanism. And that is a way that I create, like you're saying, a felt sense of safety. Because if I'm absolutely right, if I believe that I'm absolutely right, my brain can go, well, this is it. And this feels secure. But it's a very fluid sense of safety. And so then we're like riding this roller coaster. And so what we're seeing so much of is highly defended people. And as people who were really created for connection and belonging, that sense of interacting with so many highly defended people keeps us at a distance. And then we're not receiving internally what we were designed to receive, which is connection and belonging. And so much of this is understanding I cannot take on what everyone else is doing or feeling, because I have so much work within myself in this current state of things to just nurture myself and create a sense of connection to self so that I can show up and be connectable anywhere I can find that. It's not going to happen with everybody. And if I come to the table connectable because I've nurtured and loved myself through whatever gets stirred up inside those core emotions, then I have more of an opportunity to connect with others who are connectable. If I come armored up and defensive and critical and shaming, I'm not coming connectable. And then I'm not receiving sort of that intrinsic need of connection and belonging. So it's really trying to figure out, what do I do to nurture connectability within myself? And Roxie, I don't know if you want to add to that.
I agree with what you said. I think it's very important to get to the core emotions and to speak for myself from that. Because again, I think that does lead to connection, and failing to do that then just creates disconnection. And I feel like I've had enough of that this past year, and then some. Yeah, I think that's really important.
And there's a freedom. I'm sorry.
No,
go ahead. I was just going to say that there's a freedom, and I shared this with a client today. All of the work that we do in therapy, all of the work we do to connect with self and nurture ourself through our core emotions leads to authentic showing up, right? We show up in the world much more authentic. And I told my client today, I said, authenticity is the prize. It's the reward in and of itself, right? Because we get the freedom to lay down this people pleasing and this perfectionism and the judgment and the harshness. So all of this work to come connectable to the table leads to that authentic self showing up in the world, which is in itself the great prize that we're all kind of looking for. Just had to add that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's how connection is birthed. If we're not being authentic, there's no connection. Connection isn't possible. And I think when we notice our own body response, if we're around someone defensive, we all can get defensive. Let's be honest. I mean, we all can be defensive. Noticing your own body response when you feel like you're brushing up a defense, that gives you information that's really important information where you can acknowledge maybe where someone's coming from and own and really connect to your own emotion at that point and notice your own defense response system triggered. Because what we want to do is if someone's defended, we want to really defensive, and I kind of get a pit in my stomach. It happened today. I was reading something on Facebook, because Facebook is just a plethora of putting opinions out there. And I could feel my body response. I could feel the pit in my stomach, knowing that it was a defense mechanism of the other person, but my defense mechanism also wanted to kick in to protect myself. And in order for me to move through the defenses, I had to notice my body response and then connect to that core emotion of sadness. Because at that point I felt sad. I'm like, oh, I really want to connect with this person. They feel unconnectable right now, which is their point of something's going on for them, holding that compassionate space. So the defense response, to your point, Rachel, is really important to understand how that works. It starts at a very early age. We all have them. So you can understand maybe where someone else might be in defense and then how you might shift into defense. And it's different than boundaries. Boundaries, does anyone want to talk about how boundaries are different than defenses? Feel free to jump in if anyone wants to talk about that.
I can. Roxie, you want to take it?
Not really, no.
Okay.
I'm thinking about that.
So from my point of view, boundaries are being able to say, this is what's okay, this is what's not okay. I'm not in a place of trying to self-protect. I still want to maintain my own emotions. I still potentially, and maybe I don't want to connect, I still want to somewhat connect in a way that's going to be healthy for me. So it might look like I appreciate that you feel, or I hear that you feel unsafe. I'm making this up. Let me give a real life example. So I might say if someone gets angry about something they saw in the news, because this is what's happening. And I can say, oh, I hear that you're really upset or you're really angry about XYZ that happened in the news. And I still want to stay in connection. Can we put a pin in that and maybe talk about something else? So I'm still trying to now that might not be possible. And at that point, I might say, you know what, this might be a topic we might not be able to talk about. And so I respectfully want to just move on to something else. Or I might say, thank you for sharing that. I'm going to go ahead and go, or I'm going to get off the phone now. I love you and I'm going to get off the phone now. So there's different ways to still try to maintain intention of this acknowledgement of the other person, and I can have a boundary. A defense would be me trying to people please my way through it. Maybe I'm agreeing with something I totally don't agree with to try to hustle for that connection. That would be another defense response. Or maybe I get angry back, or in a rage back. That might be another defense response.
Or armor up would be
yeah. So I want to make that distinction. I think defense is when we're anxious, the defense system wants to kick in to protect us because
I can give a really good example of that. Bless my father's heart. He and I do not see eye to eye politically. And when he would bring his political beliefs kind of to the conversation, every conversation, bless his heart, I would get defensive for a long time, and it would be just shut down, feeling like a little girl who couldn't have a voice because this is my dad and I'm just supposed to sit and, and I finally got to the point where I was like, I want connection with my father, and I'm going to have to not be defensive so that I can stay connectable. And so what that's turned to is, Dad, we don't agree on this. Can we talk about something else? Or I just simply go, yep, I hear you. And I change the subject, because that keeps me present in the game, in the hopes for connection and relationship, versus what I was doing for years and years, which is, this is ridiculous internally. This is ridiculous. Why does he always bring this up? I'm so mad. I just need to shut down. I just want to get out of here. My fight, flee, or freeze response. And it's made such a difference in our relationship that I've managed my part of that and set boundaries versus getting defensive with him.
That's a great example. And I think so many people can go, yes, me too. I've had such a similar experience, maybe not even with family, with friends, with neighbors. Mm-hmm. I think it's something that's an important conversation that we have, how we handle that. But the anxiety, so did your anxiety go down once you changed your, work through that defense response?
Absolutely. And what I was able to access out of defense mode was my sadness that we see it so differently. And, some of my fear that we may never really connect because we see things so differently. And I was able to feel through those and get some clarity about, I need to manage whether I get defensive and set boundaries instead. And, kind of going back to what you were saying about, Brene Brown calls it the rumble, what's happening in me. Emotions are a part of our design, just like logic and reason are. Both are healthy. And to be in balance, we need to access both parts. And emotions are just designed to give us information. So if we can stay present and mindful enough, kind of moment by moment, hour by hour, day by day, to go, oh, this is what I'm feeling. When Dad starts to, share his political beliefs that are so different, and I feel fear that we're going to be in an hour-long conversation, and I just, okay, I can feel that fear, right? That's just to give me information. I don't have to push the emotion away. I need to acknowledge it and go, oh, okay, this is where I'm at. I'm rumbling with what gets pushed on in me by that topic or that, reaction from him. I get to manage that. Take some big deep breaths and slow everything down and go, boundaries versus defense, Rachel. My self-talk had to change so that I could set boundaries instead of consistently jumping to a defense, fight, flight, or freeze response.
And you became more centered, and you became more kind of grounded at that. So when Dad would get heightened or activated, you're like, okay, I got this.
Right. I didn't have to match him. And then what that did, that I've noticed, because it's not slam dad time at all, but what I've noticed is that he came down to my level of calm. And so we just had a good conversation on the phone today, and we were laughing, and it's just like, man, this feels really nice. He's starting to see out of his defense mode that we can talk about other things besides politics. We can connect in other ways. And it really, it's taken 46 years this Saturday, but we have finally gotten to a point where we're both moving out of defense mode and actually developing some connection there, which is really nice. And I hope he doesn't watch this. Sometimes he does. I do love you, Dad.
How vulnerable it is when we share. You're modeling what it looks like to do vulnerability.
Oh, yeah. So
and this is not to pick on anyone's parents. This isn't to pick on anyone. It's to show you what it looks like when you do this work and how powerful it changes relationships. in this work. I just can't emphasize that enough. Roxie, what are some ways people can start working through the anxiety?
I think first of all, you have to acknowledge what it is that you're feeling and acknowledge that you are feeling anxiety, first of all. And then to try to breathe through it, notice where it is in you physically, and try to breathe through that. And if you're feeling anxiety, underneath that is one of the core emotions. And I think trying to go there and figure out what that is all about is an important part of it too. But I think acknowledging what you're feeling and how you handle it is really important for sure.
Yes, acknowledgement and awareness is the very top keys. Rachel, what would you add?
I don't know that I'd add much more to that. I think she covered it pretty well. The one thing that did come up for me when you said, where am I feeling it physically? I know that can sound like therapeutic mumbo jumbo, right? What do you mean? Where am I feeling it? My monthly massage therapist knows exactly where I feel it because I have knots all in my neck and my shoulders. And she's always like, oh, was it a rough month? And I'm like, yes, it kind of was. So that's where I physically could feel it in my body. I get a lot of clients saying, oh, I feel that in my chest. That's sometimes because that's a heartfelt belief that is deep and long standing in the course of my life. And so that it lands right here. Sometimes it's a pit in your stomach. Sometimes my leg is shaking. I had a client whose leg shook like every minute of every session for the first handful of sessions. That's where she was feeling it in her body, right? And so we get clues. We just have to pay attention.
And I think once you have the clues, that gives you that information to go, oh, something's going on emotionally for you. So when you're stuffing things down, you're putting let's just pretend like this is a jar. And every time you stuff something down, let's say you're afraid or you're people pleasing or you're in a defense by shutting down, fight, flight, or freeze. You kind of look at your jar and it starts overflowing. Your body's going to tell you there's something that needs to be released. There's something that needs to be tended to. There's something that needs to be nurtured. And there's nothing wrong with you. It's what's happening to us in this time. And there are no bad feelings. We don't want to cry in front of other people. How many times have you both had clients that say, I don't want to cry. I don't want to cry. And I'm like, yes, we're crying because we're releasing it. And it's a different.
Crying's hard. It's not fun.
It's hard.
It's so good and it's so hard
and messy and yucky.
Yes, I know, and not pretty. Yes, we want to move away from it quickly.
Yes, because we're uncomfortable. We're like, we just want to have it all together. We have a great question from Julie in the chat. One of my former bosses always told me that anxiety comes from three main fears: fear of death, fear of engulfment, and fear of embarrassment. Do you agree with these?
Well, I can give my personal feedback. This is just me personally and my experience living life and, being a therapist. I personally think our biggest fear, again, because we are creatures designed for connection and belonging, I think our biggest fears are rejection and abandonment. And, that can feel like death. That can lead to being engulfed in relationships, codependent maybe, and that can lead, embarrassment would feed into that. But I'm not saying Julie's boss was wrong at all. I think it's a different perspective. But for me personally, just because I believe, again, that we were designed for connection and belonging, anything that threatens that is going to really push on my innermost fear, is my opinion.
Roxie?
I would agree with you, Rachel. I can see how the things that were mentioned there, fear of death, engulfment, and embarrassment, tie in with abandonment, particularly. But I agree. It's probably just a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Julie's saying, really like that perspective. Johnny's saying, I agree, connection is key. And that fear of not being connected with, not being loved, not being lovable, not being worthy, and the fear of abandonment, rejection and judgment, I think play into all of that. I think that's at the absolute root. And if we
And
have had perceived abandonment, or we have had abandonment, or we have been rejected, that plays in whether we're going to be vulnerable and authentic and tell the truth about how we really feel. Go ahead, Rachel.
I was just going to say that really tells us why this topic of reentry is so so tense and so stressful, because if I re-enter the world one way and my sister or my mom or my brother or my husband or my coworkers are re-entering differently, there's a risk they will reject me. There's a risk they will not want me around. And so really, again, we kind of bring that full circle where there's just so many layers to this process of reentering. And if we could really, truly just start with ourselves, really connect to what fears are stirred up in us, what sadness there is over connections that have been lost along the last 15 months, and really sit with that and nurture ourselves lovingly through those core emotions, we're going to come to the table and go, man, but this is how I believe I should reenter, and that's okay.
And I think that you hit on something really important when you said you were talking about the last 14, 15 months, because we were so disconnected. And I know I have several clients who live alone, and we're very, very disconnected, isolated. And so they want desperately to get back into normal life and to reconnect, and yet then there are all the fears and the things that we've been talking about that make that very complicated for them.
And you may have in your mind, I experienced this today because I went back and had my first two face-to-face client sessions in 14, 15, how I lost track. And I just was so excited about it. And I was like, this is going to be so fun. And I get there with my first client who I've worked with for about a year. And I just was like, this is so awkward. This is so odd. And we're so close. We're 6 feet apart, but oh my gosh, this is so weird. And I just didn't expect myself to have that reaction. So again, I had to kind of notice it and go, okay, you didn't expect this response. Let's nurture yourself through it. You're okay. Let's keep showing up, right? And take it step by step, moment by moment, because you might not know how you feel until you dip a toe in the water and go, ooh, I wasn't expecting that. That's okay too.
Yeah. And I think it's going to vary from person to person, and it can vary within the same person. You can be fine, and then suddenly something triggers and you're scared. So that I think it's important to give yourself some grace along the way and be kind and nurturing to yourself.
And I think those are key components, in naming it, like naming it out loud, because when we name it, things will feel different when you see someone for the first time. And when you name it and say, oh man, this feels awkward at first. I'm feeling awkward. Is this awkward for you? And they might be like, no, I'm fine. When we name it, we're actually able to process it. We're actually able to process this kind of elephant in the room. And there will be different accommodations that we need to think about that we haven't thought of before. So it's taking in consideration not only your own feelings, but what's going on for this other person that you haven't seen in a long time, checking in with them emotionally. How are you feeling about this? Is anything getting stirred up? We don't normally talk like this. We just go, hey, how are you? How are the kids? Like, we want to now have deeper conversation. I don't think we want to go back to the surface level conversations anymore. People are thirsty for real, authentic connection. Don't be afraid to ask the question, how are you feeling? How has the last 15 months or however long it's been? How has the last 18 months, I don't even know how long it's been for you? What's been your biggest challenge? What's been, something positive maybe that came out of it? And maybe they don't have anything positive. That's okay too. Let's talk about it. Let's process what's happened the last 18 months instead of just moving on past it. Looks like Roxie.
We lost
Roxie. She vanished. So I'd encourage you all to start naming what you're feeling, start asking questions, not only of yourself, but other people. Let's change the way we interact with each other and start asking different questions. And it may be uncomfortable at first, and that's okay. Try asking one question. I challenge you this next time you get together with someone. How has the last 18 months been for you? No, really, I really want to know. This is a way to start breaking the ice, to name what's been going on, and they might need something. Is there something you need now as you're re-entering and kind of coming, doing more social things? Some people might not be comfortable yet doing that. That's fine too. Here comes Roxie back on.
Well, and while we're waiting for her, I just wanted to add, don't be afraid to be the person who asks that question, and don't be afraid to be the person who communicates honestly. I'm really nervous. Like, I don't know how this is going to go. So on both ends, whether you're the one asking or the one being asked, that vulnerability and that honest communication is critical to that connection that we long for.
And I can tell you, when people can have these conversations, at first it feels uncomfortable and you're leaning into the discomfort. And then all of a sudden your nervous system goes, okay, I feel seen. I feel like
this is safe.
This is a safe place for me to come and be who I am. And that's what we want more of in the world. So I encourage you to, let's try to have some deeper conversations. Let's try to acknowledge what you're feeling, acknowledge what other people are feeling, and come together as we navigate this transition. Is there anything you guys want to add as we wrap up?
No, I think we covered it. I hope this helped, because it's an intense, very emotion-driven time right now for all of us.
Definitely is. Yeah.
Well, I thank you, Rachel and Roxie, for joining me. Thank you for your wonderful comments and questions. We're so grateful for you. And if you found this helpful, feel free to pass it along. We just want to be of service to anybody that might be struggling right now. If you are struggling at any level, there's resources out there for you. There's local emergency rooms, 1-800-273-TALK. If you have any suicidal ideation or know what someone's struggling with suicide, please don't try to do this alone. You matter, you're important, and we're here to offer support where we can. So thank you, everybody, and we're wishing you well as you re-enter this next transition, wherever you might be. Thank you all so much.